مساء الخير مشاهدينا، أهلا بكم معنا إلى هذه الحلقة الجديدة من بصراحة من على شاشة سكاي نيوز عربية. أرحب بكم، أرحب بضيفي لهذه الليلة الرئيس الأفغاني الجديد أشرف غني. أهلا وسهلا بك معنا سيادة الرئيس، وهذا أول ظهور له على فضائية عربية خاصة بها سكاي نيوز. أرحب بك.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. It's very good to be with you.
Thank you. It's our pleasure. من دواعي سرورنا طبعا. عندما تداعت رؤوس التماثيل الأثرية في أفغانستان ذهل العالم عن عبثية السيف والهدم باسم الدين في القرن العشرين، ولم تكن الشعوب على دراية أن هذا المشهد سيكون نموذجا يحتذى للأسف وينتشر ليقتل البشر بدل التماثيل، وتنحر الأعناق وتتحجر العقول، فتتكون تورا بورا في بلاد الشام، في المغرب، في أفريقيا وربما أبعد. ضيفنا اليوم هو الرئيس أشرف غني، الرئيس الأفغاني الجديد، في أول حوار له مع قناة عربية. رئيس جديد وصف بأنه أكاديمي محاط بأمراء حرب، رجل متعلم صاحب رؤية شخصية وخبرة دولية في بناء الدولة والتحول الاجتماعي، وأفغانستان بحاجة لهذا بالتحديد. لعب أدواراً أساسية في الأمم المتحدة وفي البنك الدولي. غني كان وزيراً لمالية حميد كارزاي وكان مستشاره، ومن ثم رئيساً لجامعة كابول. أزمة اختياره كرئيس للبلاد بالتصويت يخرج منها بالاتفاق مع غريمه ومنافسه. فهل ينجح غني في بناء أفغانستان بعيداً عن التقاتل والفساد، بعيداً عن سياسة واقتصاد الحرب؟ أهلا بكم، أرحب بك من جديد سيادة الرئيس.
Thank you so much. First of all, look at our record. In barely 3 months, we've managed to bring unity where there was division. Political consensus is key to political will. And it's on this basis that we've brought the majority into unity instead of division. Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, all are examples of what not to do. Namely, go for monopoly, go for exclusion, go for a narrow set of interests. What we have done is to articulate a vision of political inclusiveness and actually practice it. Who else but us had the courage to reach to our political opponent and unite? This is the first issue, because with unity you can have results. And any political disagreement must be resolved within the walls of the government, within the office of the state, instead of spilling out to the street. So if that is a measure, that's the first measure. Second, the world had practically given up on Afghanistan. Today, we've brought, we have 5 circles of foreign policy. Our neighbors, and our neighbors now, we've had an unprecedented outreach to convince our neighbors that we must all live in peace and security, and that unless we unite, the new waves of violence and extremism will swallow us up. The jury is out, but our efforts are very significant. Our second circle is the Islamic circle. And I'm here today with one of our major partners, the United Arab Emirates. My first trip was to Saudi Arabia. We're reaching out because we must own the future of Islam, and we must own it together. We are heirs of one of the most outstanding civilizations in human history, but we've lost the ability to define that civilization, to own the message of the Abbasids, the Fatimids of Egypt, and the Umayyads of Andalus. Afghanistan will re-own that civilizational past because we're very secure in who we are. in Islam is fundamental to our existence because all aspects. Our third circle are United States, Europe, Japan, Australia. We've managed to complete a security transition with dignity and honor with them, and we've renewed our parliament with an absolute majority, approved two outstanding agreements, one with the United States, one with NATO. And on this basis, we can look forward to the next 10 years of a secure relationship. Our fourth circle is Asia. My first trip as president was to China. And we've established very close relations with both China and India. We've created the first tripartite mechanism between China, United States, and Afghanistan so that we can bring commonality. Our fifth circle, or the developmental institutions, private sector, and investors. In London, we held a conference, and again, we've brought these five. So this alignment allows us to think through a future. And what is that future? We have two choices. One, to sink into a vicious circle where we have been for close to 40 years. We were the first country in the last 2 decades of the 20th century to be colonized brutally by the Russians, by the former Soviet Union. But now the alternative is a virtuous circle, a circle where the will of the people will become our guide. We're blessed with a remarkable people. Our women, 38% of our women came out and voted. Women who had not gotten out of their houses for 30 years came out and voted. Young people, we are a country of young people. So what is fundamental is to rethink the image of Afghanistan. The image that the media portrays, because it's part of the reality, is the image of suicide bombers, violence, etc., drugs. But there is another image that is much deeper, that is much broader. A people wanting to be normal. A people wishing to have the lives of ordinary people. But ordinary lives that would be meaningful, that would be healthy, that would be productive, and that, I think, we are embarked on. So our vision is to become a meeting ground.
هل من المفيد برأيك أن نعرف لماذا فشلت الدولة في أفغانستان؟ لماذا إعادة الإعمار لم تنجح في أفغانستان؟ لماذا الحملة العسكرية على طالبان؟ مليارات الدولارات ذهبت إلى أفغانستان ولم يتغير شيء. لابد أن هناك خطأ جسيم وقع في مكان آخر. أنت كيف ترى؟ كيف ستتجاوزه؟ وربما هذا الأهم.
Sure, absolutely. The first thing is every problem is not a nail to be hit with a hammer. Our problem in the Arab Islamic world has been over-reliance on use of force. We must respect the democratic process of empowering the population and create a two-way street. The fundamental issue is, what is a state? A state is an instrument to serve the public. It is not a power over the public. And once you realize this, accountability sits in. I'm described as the first servant of Afghanistan, not as its master. My masters are the voters of Afghanistan, the widows, the orphans, the poor. It is this, once we realize who are the principals, which are the people, and that the government is an instrument, it performs a set of functions, then we are able to organize our efforts much more easily than if we think that we are high and mighty and we are above the law. And the failure came from where? The failure came from over-reliance on use of force. Problems from the Soviet invasion on, Afghanistan became a battleground for first resort to force. Now we are containing the use of force. We are looking at legitimacy of force. we will still, unfortunately, have to use force, but this force must be thought through, it must be considered legitimate, it must be bound by rules and not arbitrary. This is the fundamental challenge. Because of this, human rights really matters. Because when you really have your back to the wall, that's when your values become clear. And second, peace. Peace is an imperative for us. Whatever political differences arose, whatever drove us to take arms against each other, we must find this at the negotiating table. Because perpetuation of violence cannot be in the interest of anyone who calls herself or himself an Afghan. There are other forces that, of course, do not have an interest in Afghanistan. For instance, for Al-Qaeda or Daesh, Afghanistan is a simple battleground. They are after destroying the state system as we know it. But our people, your people, all of us together have an interest to think through stability through a different process. Stability after the military coups of the Middle East came from the barrel of the gun. Force, brutal repression, censorship, mukhabarat. Now we need to have a participatory process where people own the process, where they see themselves reflected and see that the government will become the instrument for change of their lives, the lives of their children, and the lives of their grandchildren.
سيادة الرئيس، أنا سمعت لديك الكثير من الآراء تقول مشكلتنا أننا نتكلم نظري، يعني نحاول أن نطبق الكتب على الواقع بينما الواقع لا نأخذه بعين الاعتبار كمعادلات. كلامك جميل ممتاز، يشبه الحلم ولكنه، لأنه بالنتيجة على الأرض كل هذه المبادئ الصحيحة والجربت في مكان آخر يمكن أن يبتلعها أمراء الحرب، الفساد، سياسة الحرب واقتصاد الحرب كما بدأت بالمقدمة. كيف ستعالج هذه الأمور؟ من أين تبدأ؟ وكيف ستتعامل مع الإرهاب الذي يهدد أي مشروع؟
I think you're the theorist and I'm the practitioner. So I think, with all due respect, you've never moved from your chair.
Oh, I did many times.
I've been elected in one of the most difficult countries on earth. So please give me the due process. First, corruption. Kabul Bank was a scandal. About $850 million of public resources were stolen. On my second day in office, I opened up the case. The Supreme Court of Afghanistan has judged on it. We are now realizing the money back. If you wanted political will in concrete action, this is a manifestation of concrete action. Corruption is like a cancer that eats through society. We are making sure not just to deal with the symptoms, but with the underlying causes. So I focused not only immediately to get public interested in full application of the rule of law to the culprits of Kabul Bank, but I met with every private bank in the country, read their supervision reports, personally called them into my office and said, I want a reform program within 2 months. And we have a reform program from all these banks within this period. It's under implementation. Thereby, we've avoided a huge crisis. And now we are working with our banking sector to create a vibrant banking sector. We are appointing, we've just nominated one of our best bankers, a man who moved a bank from a capital of $5 million to $1 billion within 5 years as the head of the Central Bank of Afghanistan. So that is an indication of what we're doing in concrete way. Our military was very top heavy, it had gotten old. People past 65 were still in position of authority. In 3 months, not a In 13 years, not a single general had been retired.
In 13?
Yes, in the past. In 3 months, I've retired 15 generals, thereby opening the way for a movement. Our Chief Justice, for 3.5 years, against the provisions of Constitution, was acting. I retired him. We are now reviewing. Every commander of the police that gets appointed, every person at the rank of a brigadier gets at least half an hour interview with me. So in very concrete terms, you know, the theory gets translated into very concrete processes. Prisoners. I'm the first president to go to prisons and look at the files of prisoners, to have an open discussion and dialogue with them, and to appoint a commission that would bring their cases to closure. So time now needs to be judged in relationship to the scale of the problems. What we've inherited are problems of 40 years, but the sense of opening, understanding them, tackling them one by one, in creating the basis. Without region, without regional peace, you cannot arrive at peace. So I've had an intense discussion with our neighbor, partner, interlocutor, and simultaneously a very difficult partner in this process, Pakistan. We are taking a leap to make sure that we understand that threats are common. In the wake of tragedy of the Peshawar suicide, I've taken very decisive action. In the state of Afghanistan is taken decisive action to make sure that our Pakistani counterparts, friends, and particularly the ordinary men and women in Pakistan realize that Afghanistan is a friend in the hour of need. This has created a different climate. We are discussing very serious issues, but we are making progress.
سيادة الرئيس، اسمح لي توقف مع فاصل قصير ونعود لنتابع هذا الحوار بصراحة بعد فاصل قصير مع الرئيس الأفغاني أشرف غني.
Show me a single province where they can raise their flag. History would need to settle the question of how effective NATO was and how effective President Karzai was. Reform, full reform of the police is not going to be a 10-day process. It's more like a 10-year process. What is my moral responsibility is to change the future.
أهلا بكم مشاهدينا، نتابع معكم هذا اللقاء للرئيس الأفغاني أشرف غني في أول لقاء يجريه مع فضائية عربية، لنتحدث طبعا عن استحقاقات أفغانستان للرئيس الجديد. سيادة الرئيس، تحدثت عن الشرطة وتصحيح جهاز الشرطة. هناك تقارير مقلقة خرجت في الأيام الأخيرة، وأرجوك يعني أن تصلح لي حتى إذا كان في هناك أي تقديرات خاطئة، لهذا نجري الحوار لنعرف منك أكثر، لأن هذه هي الصورة التي تصلنا. تقارير مقلقة تقول بأن جهاز الشرطة تعب من الفساد، يكاد ينهار تحت يعني جهاز، حتى الرواتب فيه معطل، حتى لا غير معروف من ترك الشرطة ومن بقي فيها. هل لهذا الدرجة يعني طريق طويل؟ المهم يعني التركة صعبة بالتأكيد، ثقيلة، والمهمة صعبة، ولكنك أنت هنا تقول لي إنها ليست مستحيلة، وهذا شيء جميل.
Again, first, the salary of the police was managed by UNDP. They were trusted by the donors to create systems. They failed to create systems.
They failed.
They were paid hundreds of millions, over $200 million. They failed to create a simple system.
هل يفاجئك هذا؟
The number of the police is around 157,000. There are cards for 300,000. And despite, Is this a service worth $200 million? I could have done this with $5 million. But the international aid system is incredibly inefficient. Now we have created, in these months since I've come, an Afghan-led process where we will replace UNDP within 6 months by a credible system which benchmarks with clarity and precisely to know how many police we have, what is their level of presence, and what is the trust of the people in this. Our police has two sides, two faces. One side is heroic, one side is ugly. The heroic side is that we've had a policeman, not one, two, but recently, a couple of weeks ago. There was a suicide bomber. This man went and forced the explosion, losing his life, but saving the lives of hundreds of people, potentially thousands. That's the heroic side. That's the determination. The other side is also that there's a lot of corruption. Now we need to make sure that the culture of impunity regarding corruption ends, but this heroic dedication to the country, the patriotic sense that is there, is nurtured. It is police forces round the world have been notoriously difficult and corrupt. At turn of the 20th century, the New York Police Department, one of the most corrupt on earth. And corruption still continues in the most advanced countries. Scandinavia's are clean totally, but there are a lot of difficulties. Reform, full reform of the police is not going to be a 10-day process. It's more like a 10-year process.
سيادة الرئيس، من الملفت للنظر حكمك على الجهاز أو السيستم المساعدة الدولية التي قدم إلى برنامج المساعدة الدولية التي قدم إلى أفغانستان. دعني أسألك سؤال مباشر، هل تعتقد أن الدولة التي أنشئت في أفغانستان عقب الإطاحة بحكم طالبان بين 2002-2004 هل تعتقد أنها كانت دولة فاشلة؟
It was failed politics, because we were invaded. The failure was not internal. Afghanistan was no threat on earth to anyone in 1978 or in 1979. The former Soviet Union willfully, criminally, and with criminal intent invaded a neutral country, a country that had never posed a threat to it. We lost at least 1.5 million people. At least 6 million people became refugees. At least 1 million people were internally displaced. We lost materially between 1978 and 2001, $240 billion in lost assets. You know, Kabul in 2001 was a shell, an empty shell, a burned out series of buildings. Please understand the cost of this. I think Syrians can sympathize with us because the cause of destruction, what Aleppo, what Homs have experienced, is what we experience in every single one of our countries. Our highway system, for instance, was completely destroyed. What used to take 2 hours between Kabul and Jalalabad used to take 17 hours. So the base from which we've begun in 2001 was very low. People were literally on their last. Okay. From there, we've come a significant way forward, but it does not correspond to the aspirations of our people, fortunately. Our people aspire much higher, and that will push us to get our lives together. Another point, foreign aid has never transformed the country. Wealth is created internally. Prosperity can only come from owning your country and its problems. Singapore had nothing. Today, it's one of the wealthiest countries on earth. And everybody, including Nobel Prize winners, were predicting that it would collapse.
سيادة الرئيس الأفغاني السابق حميد كارزاي قال إن عملية الناتو في أفغانستان سببت الكثير من المعاناة وخسائر في الأرواح كبيرة، ولم تحقق أي نجاحات لأن البلد ما زال غير آمن. هل توافقه الرأي؟
We are in a different context. History would need to settle the question of how effective NATO was and how effective President Karzai was. The context has changed now. NATO is a very small but significant factor. It's a partner in equipping, training, and assisting Afghanistan. We want this. The Parliament of Afghanistan, the people of Afghanistan have agreed to this, and we want to make sure we have a meaningful partnership. How use of force, how effective force was used and not used is better left to the historians.
غريب أنك لا تريد أن ألا ترى أنه من المفيد أن تعرفوا ما الأخطاء التي ارتكبت، ما النوايا التي كانت؟ لأنه حتى مثلا عندما تسمع وزير خارجية البريطاني سيادة الرئيس يقول، السابق طبعا، يقول إن قرار إرسال جنود بريطانيين إلى إقليم هيلمند اعتمد على معلومات استخباراتية يشوبها الكثير من الأخطاء، وأن أخطاء جسيمة ارتكبت وساد إنكار جماعي للفشل. ما هو تعليقك؟ ألا يخيفك أنه هكذا كان يتم التعامل مع بلدك الغالي اليوم وأنت تستلمه؟
What I brought to you is the past. The shape of the past cannot be changed. What is my moral responsibility is to change the future, to use the present to maximum effect. NATO does not have the force level to get engaged and cause civilian casualties in Afghanistan. It just doesn't. We have made the transition. We, the government of Afghanistan, are in control of the security. We are responsible for it. Now we may need to make sure that the Afghan army, the Afghan police, the Afghan intelligence service does not make the mistakes, that it treats Helmand right, that it treats every part of the country right. This is Afghanistan was an unpredictable event. No one on earth was prepared for calamity of September 11 in the subsequent engagement with Afghanistan. So there was a lot of improvisation. And improvisations are always problematic. And particularly when you bring many nations together with their own distinctive ways, approaches, and bring them to an environment that is one of the most difficult, ecologically and socially extraordinarily complex, they simplify. Simplification becomes problematic. Because of this, the responsibility is that of us Afghans.
أرى بالضبط منطقك بأن نحاول أن نركز على المستقبل، لأن الدخول في الماضي قد يهدر الوقت، يهدر طاقات حتى الإيجابية والأمال، وربما هذا جزء من هذه الرؤية المهمة لإعادة بناء الدول. سيادة الرئيس، اليوم إذا أردنا نتحدث عن اليوم، تقرير الأمم المتحدة في أفغانستان يقول إن 2014 شهد زيادة في عدد القتلى بنسبة 33% من الهجمات الانتحارية، على الأغلب مسؤول عنها حركة طالبان. قل لي كيف ستتعامل مع طالبان؟ هل تعتقد بأنه صحيح هذا الاعتقاد السائد بأن طالبان اليوم تنتظر تكمن حتى يخرج القوات الأمريكية ويخرج الناتو من أفغانستان لتعود وتنقض على الدولة؟
A series of very meaningful questions. First, the rise in conflict. There are several reasons. One of the most significant is that the Army of Pakistan carried an operation in North and South Waziristan. This operation resulted in movement of bulk of Al-Qaeda, the Uzbek movement, the Chinese, and others were all united and Terrorism International into Afghanistan. They came with arms and they intensified the conflict. Second, they thought that there was a vacuum, and that by moving into it, they could fill it in frighten the people and cause the government to fall to pieces. Fortunately, we managed to bring the election to a successful conclusion and form a government. But that interval, the time it took, was a time of uncertainty. 3, there was a lot of uncertainty as to whether the international forces would remain engaged in Afghanistan or not. President Karzai had refused to sign the bilateral security agreement and the state of forces agreement with NATO. That produced a lot of uncertainty. NATO started withdrawing fairly rapidly, particularly its technological capabilities. And this, again, provided an opportunity for some of the networks to carry attacks on Kabul and a number of other civilians. Second, the Taliban. They have 2 choices: talk and allow us to resolve the fundamental issues. What is it that is dividing us? It has to be put on the table. We, the government, are keen to start earnest discussions on peace, because we believe that, like every major conflict, whether you take Northern Ireland or you take Latin America, the ultimate solution to a political conflict is peace discussions, where fundamental issues are thought through, agreed upon, and a pathway, a roadmap is arrived at. Or they can reject and engage with some of the worst networks of criminality in the world to kill our people. In case they make the first decision, and we very much hope that they will make the first decision, we will be able to resolve the fundamental issues peacefully. In case some of their elements opt for the second one, because opium is profitable and the drug lords will pay for conflict, then we will need to defend our people. And in that case, peace will come, stability will come, but it will be a lot more costly.
سيادة الرئيس، هناك كثيرون يقولون اليوم ربما طالبان عندما كانت أضعف في موقف أضعف لم تأتي إلى الحوار، لماذا ستأتي اليوم إلى الحوار؟ وهناك شكوك عالية من قبلها بأن هناك أصلا قدرة عسكرية من قبلكم على إنهائها أو إيجاعها، يعني إلحاق الأذى بها بشكل أو بآخر من قبل الجيش والشرطة.
Well, first, if they've taken a single province of Afghanistan, show me a single province where they can raise their flag. Is the Afghan army in a face-to-face battle lost a single battle to them? Have our special forces been unable to protect the honor of the country? So we are not as weak as sentiments, common misunderstandings portray. Yes, there is insecurity, but this insecurity is not likely, God willing, to result in collapse of the government.
سيادة الرئيس، اسمح لي أقف عند هذه النقطة مع فاصل قصير لنتابع بعده الحوار. مشاهدينا بصراحة مكمل معكم بعد لحظات.
And I don't want Afghans to be in prisons, but if we have to prevent the bloodshed of our children, we will. Libya and Afghanistan are not separated. Afghans are fighting in Syria. They've been recruited as mercenaries. Syrians are fighting in Afghanistan. This is the worst job on earth, but I'm going to turn it, hopefully, into one of the best jobs in the world.
أهلا بكم من جديد مشاهدينا. نتابع هذا الحوار مع الرئيس الأفغاني أشرف غني في أول لقاء له مع فضائية عربية. سيادة الرئيس، هل أنتم مستعدون لحماية أفغانستان بصراحة كما هو اسم البرنامج؟ هل أنت مرتاح لقدرات الجيش والشرطة الآن؟
I'm not, but the issue is not Every member of the Afghan army, every member of the Afghan police is a volunteer. Nobody is compelled them. They don't belong to a single sect. They don't belong to a single part of the country. They are the sons and now the daughters of the land. Yes, they have shortcomings, but they're patriots. Mobilizing them, and the reason they are fighting is for the protection of their families, for a different future. We want an army that would not be fighting. We want an army that would be trained to excel in protecting. But if we have to prevent the bloodshed of our children, we will. You know, for thousands of years, people have attempted to swallow us, and they have been swallowed by us. Do not forget who we are. Once the Afghan people resolve, we do not stop. Did anybody expect the Soviet Union to be defeated in our land? Did we not? So now we have a will to construct. We want to move beyond bloodshed. We want to move. We have serious problems. If we did not, I would have not run for office. I would have been very happy to write my books. But the reason I ran for this job, and the reason, this is the worst job on earth. But I'm going to turn it, hopefully, into one of the best jobs on earth.
سيادة الرئيس، الاتفاقية الأمنية حديث بطبيعة الحال يجب أن نفهمه. هل ستحل هذه الاتفاقية بوضوح لو سمحت، حتى يعني تصل الصورة إلى المشاهدين كاملة؟ الاتفاقية الأمنية التي وقعتها بعد استلامك منصبك بيومين مع الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، هل ستحل مشكلة الغارات الجوية، طائرات بدون طيار؟ هل ستحل مشكلة اختطاف من مشتبه بهم إرهابيين من أرض أفغانستان؟ هذه المشاكل التي تقلق السيادة الأفغانية وتجعل السماء مصدر تهديد كما أنت مرة قلت.
Well, first, the report from Senator Feinstein's committee on use of Afghan territory as a prison is clear. That period is ended. I've inquired, I've condemned that period in categorical terms. Our citizens were tortured against all human rights norms, and for God's sake, 2 psychologists were advising on torture. This is criminal. And we've condemned it. We've been assured that there are no secret prisons in Afghanistan, and were there to be, it would be a violation of our agreement. We are not permitting anyone to imprison Afghan citizens. This is part of the agreement. Right. Crystal clearly, there are no prisoners and no prisoners are being taken. The prison regime is completely Afghan. I signed the agreement because I was one of the chief negotiators of the agreement. So every comma in it has been weighed by me. Every word, phrase. And what this agreement brought is actually the full sovereignty of Afghanistan. After September 11, the United Nations Security Council had a resolution that authorized the use of international force in Afghanistan. That authority ended on December 31st, 2014 because of this agreement. Now use of force is an Afghan decision. And we're keen. Second, look at numbers. The numbers of NATO ISAF troops are extraordinarily small. At the height, there were close to 150,000 troops. And with 150,000 troops that were in combat mission. The combat mission of NATO ISAF is ended in Afghanistan on December 31st. From January 1st, they are in a non-combat role. A non-combat role means assisting, advising, and training. We need this. We need this training And our security forces cannot be supported by our internal revenues because their expenses are about 2.5 times our national revenue. So we've worked out an agreement to be able to have this support. But our fundamental goal, again, is to make the use of force redundant. When we are compelled to use force, like any state, we'll have to do it to protect order in the lives of the people. But our commitment is to peace. I've been elected on a peace platform, so we are keen to bring a comprehensive peace that would end the use of force. And I don't want Afghans to be in prisons. Prisons are not institutions of reform. They actually are schools of criminality. But when women are raped, you have to use deterrent and punishment. It's that balance. But we need to move. The key deterrent is rule of law. The key deterrent is education. The key deterrent is not to be starving.
سيادة الرئيس، هل ستتعاملون أو هل تخشى التعامل مع السجناء الإرهابيين الذين أعيدوا إليكم من غوانتانامو، يعني يحملون سيرة ذاتية قد تكون خطر على أمن أفغانستان؟ كيف ستتعاملون معهم؟
It's mixed. Some of the CVs are very benign. There were people who were taken by mistake. Of course, the evidence is now there. There have been lots of apologies. A lot of people were sold as commodities. There was a moment of anger and frustration, so evidence-based. Others are hardened criminals, and of course they've proven that when they've been released, they've engaged in terror. We must differentiate. The terrorists have no room in our system or within our minds and hearts. Innocent people must be incorporated and included back.
طيب سيادة الرئيس، أنا أريد أن أشكرك على هذا اللقاء، ولكن قبل أن أختم أريد أن أستفيد من ذهنك بالفعل، لأنه اليوم عندما نرى سوريا، العراق، اليمن، ليبيا، كلها دول تعرضت لفشل في الدول، وهناك السؤال الكبير: كيف يمكن إعادة بناء هذه الدول؟ هل تظن أن هناك استراتيجية، خطط، رؤية أكثر حكمة للتعامل مع إعادة بناء الدول ولانتصار في الحرب على الإرهاب مع خطر داعش وغيره يهدد مثل هذه الدول وأبعد؟
Well, thank you. First is that we need to realize that the state system as such is under threat. The unit of international stability are states, governments. A weak link becomes a systematic exposure of the entire system to threats. Today, instead of one weakly link, we have half a dozen. The problems, however, are being approached country by country instead of together. The threats are from networks that move like cancer. Libya and Afghanistan are not separated. Afghans are fighting in Syria. They've been recruited as mercenaries. Syrians are fighting in Afghanistan. We need to understand that this is a common threat. Because of this, the first responsibility is of all Muslim Arab leaders to rise together to understand this challenge collectively. Second, our international allies and friends must arrive with us at a common series of solutions. Third, we must stop denial. We were in denial. For a very long time, there was denial about Syria. There were statements made that Assad would go today, tomorrow, etc. He's still sitting. The basis of his longevity was not analyzed. Iraq was a government of national division, not of national unity. The complexity of Iraq was not understood. So it is important to define the problem correctly together and then devise ways that can bring solutions. You can neither solve this problem by throwing money at it or throwing force at it. It's by bringing a systematic approach and by establishing rules, relationships, and organizations that can allow us to think through regional stability together. And I'm hoping very much that this is dawning on key leaders and that the steps that will be taken would be for regional stability and prosperity together and not just a piecemeal approach.
أشكرك سيادة الرئيس. أرجو منك أن تنقل تحياتنا للسيدة الأولى السيدة رولا سعادة. ربما نحن نشعر بأنها يعني جسر لأنها أصلا لبنانية، وأيضا تضيف يعني لبريقك وشريكتك في هذا النجاح. أتمنى أن ألتقيها يوما من الأيام.
We should be delighted and thank you for remembering her.
Thank you. شكرا لك سيادة الرئيس. شكرا لكم مشاهدينا على المتابعة. بصراحة يلقاكم الأسبوع القادم.